Real-time Sovryn is go.
Ooh, the man of tomorrow coming to you from Ice Planet Zero. Of course, it might not very much look like Ice Planet Zero, but it is. Absolutely stunning this time of year. Really any time of year. I think it's the most beautiful place on earth. Anyway, got a real-time Sovryn here for you. And just getting in a walk. It's important, keep your heart rate going, get the blood flowing, all of that. Especially when you work from home and you sit in front of the computer for many hours of the day. You got to get out there. Get in the gym maybe if you can, but if you can't, you got to do what you got to do. So, I want to talk about, I just had a video come out that actually was, got the peanut gallery out there, the ducks. Had quite a few questions on it. It had to do with primitive Christianity and my theory, though it's not just mine, my theory that such a thing never existed. Actually, frankly, most scholars, religious or even I shouldn't say religious, but most non-religious scholars, though there are plenty of religious ones as well, accept this idea that somewhere, or they accept this notion that the idea that there was some kind of like cohesive Christianity at any point just isn't true. So other than maybe while Jesus was alive because he was calling the shots, but then that opens up a whole other can of worms and controversy on its own. So I'm doing this. No, I don't have any special stick or anything holding up this phone. I'm just holding it up, walking and talking. So I did this video, got quite a few questions about it, but something I actually want to make pretty clear from it that I've talked about on a lot of Patreon content. And I guess at certain points, maybe I've talked about it on Sovryn Tech overall. By the way, if you're wondering, yes, these are wired headphones. I don't necessarily have anything against AirPods other than their audio quality, their microphone quality, I should say. Audio quality is pretty good. Their microphone quality is shit. Also, I'm always waiting for, we'll get back into the subject, don't worry. I'm always waiting for that really great research, and I know it's got to be getting done somewhere. But that really, really solid research that goes beyond a shadow of a doubt. That having Bluetooth, not that Bluetooth overall is necessarily bad for you, but that having Bluetooth so close to your blood-brain barrier, as in wearing headphones that are Bluetooth, is giving you like brain cancer or something. I'm really waiting to finally read that. Plenty of people that claim it, but as far as its proof, not so much. So anyway, that doesn't mean I don't enjoy my AirPods. I very much do. It's one of the best reasons to use Apple products, quite frankly. And of course, we know most of the industry, like Samsung and others, are basically copying them. Ooh, grapes. Look at that. Yeah. Actually had some of those for breakfast this morning with the Empress of Space, Time, and Beauty, the incredible, incomparable, my wife, Mrs. Ellen Sovryn. I always think about health, of course. Got my 5 fingers on. Don't go far without those. Anyway, what I actually wanted to talk about is the Talmud. Now, like I said, some of this I've covered in Patreon content. Link is in the show notes, whether you're catching this on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or on Pocket Casts or whatever podcast app you listen to. In the show notes, there's a link for the Patreon if you want to hear that content. Because a lot of it is stuff that really should remain behind a paywall for the sake of the patrons, not me. I'll say anything, anywhere, anytime, without fear. But anyway, so if you want to check that stuff out, you can. There's years and years and years of content that'll never see the light of day elsewhere. I shouldn't say never, should I? Well, anyway. So I want to just briefly touch on the Talmud, because that was a subject that came up over and over again in that primitive Christianity video that I did, that I think a lot of people have a dramatic misunderstanding around. And I don't mean they have a dramatic misunderstanding in the sense that, oh, they think that it's like an anti-Christian text, or that they think it talks about like boiling Jesus in a pot or something like that. I don't mean that. I mean, I don't think people understand the very composition, the nature of the Talmud. You know, I'm reminded when I was growing up, it was actually a pretty amazing thing. Actually, I shouldn't say when I was growing up, because at the time, I was almost 30. So even though when you live in a world today, you know, with all of the dramatic technological changes that occur on any given day, basically, if you're a millennial, like, yes, you do feel like you're still constantly learning, like you're constantly going through this process of growing up, right? Because everything changes underneath your feet every day. You know, it's not that it's ever been a stable world, but it's definitely been a more, shall we say, a world of shifting sands since the 80s than ever before. And so if you didn't grow up before the 80s, or in the 80s a little bit perhaps, and you grew up after that, well, I mean, you saw everything change, you know, like the internet. The internet really ended up becoming, you know, I've always said it doesn't become a big deal. It didn't become a big deal until 2003. But the fact is that, like, it became a thing in the 90s. And the internet is such a dramatic shift in the way that, not just that humans interact with the world, but really in the way that humans think. Literally think. Right? How many people you know say that, oh, I don't need to remember something because I have Google in my pocket. You know, and I can just look it up. I mean, you hear that all the time. And I'm not even necessarily saying it's an invalid, you know, way of thinking. But it has changed the world. Now, the interesting thing is, the Talmud actually operates in a very similar way. So, that's called a segue, folks. It's what us professionals do. Anyway, but the initial point I was going to get to, actually, was I remember watching an episode of Stargate Atlantis. And in Stargate Atlantis, there's a point where they're meeting, spoiler alerts, the show's only been around for over a decade. But anyway, there's a point where they're meeting this woman who they find out is one of the ancients, these ascended beings or whatever. And she's going through like a lot of Earth's religious texts. You know, she's living in this other galaxy, so obviously she hasn't seen them anyway, and she's been staying as, you know, a quasi-human being, all this jazz, whatever, okay. But the religious text that she mentions, that she's very impressed by, the Talmud is in that list, and it's a short list. And I was really stunned by that, because I was thinking, like, wait, why would an ascended being be impressed by that book? That book makes no sense whatsoever. Aha. That's actually why they'd be impressed by it. So, I'm going to take a minute in this beautiful little field here. And we'll just walk around a little bit maybe here. Love the spot. I bring the control center out here a lot. Control center is my truck. Unfortunately, my truck is getting its engine replaced right now. Yay me. Fundraiser.sovryntech.com. Anyway, I love that truck. So the Talmud, Google, the internet, all this. Bring this all together, Brian. Tell me what you want to say. All right. What you got to understand is that, you know, when you think of something like the New Testament, you will commonly say to yourself that, Okay, well, the New Testament says this, right? The New Testament says, the meek shall inherit the earth, or something like that. And you take that as like, okay, there it is. That's how it goes. Or that if you die in the name of Christ, that you'll achieve eternal life. Okay, that's how it works. That's how it'll be. Like, everything feels like a statement of fact, and there are no contradictions. The issue here is that in the Western mind, whatever the hell that is, in the Western mind, people with the Western mind have come to think of religious texts as operating in that way. But not all of them do. And as I've famously said over the years on Sovryn Tech, Judaism is not a Western religion. As much as people like to claim it to be, that is 100% an Eastern religion. Just look at the way that they write. As in, or should I say, the way they write and the way they read. They read the opposite direction. Instead of left to right, it's right to left. Anyway. So, I mean, that's just one thing. But the Talmud, this is a book that is filled with contradicting statements. But they're not really contradicting statements because a lot of it is just opinions and interpretations. And they're all collected within it. Okay? But people see it as somehow being this, isn't it an authoritative text? Yes, but it's not. It's authoritative in the sense that it's widely accepted and that there is wisdom in it. It's not authoritative in the sense that it's like this grand legal document that says what's right and what's wrong. It very much functions like the internet. So basically, if you ever hear someone say, and yes, sometimes it's a turn of speech, even I use it, okay, where I'll say, well, the Talmud says. But when you say that, you're just giving one opinion of what's in the Talmud, because you could also find the differing opinion. So think of it like this. Think of the Talmud like this. It's kind of a proto-internet. Hyperlinks and everything, really. Of course, the hyperlinks are going to say the Mishnah, which I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute, or to Torah itself, the Old Testament. It's hyperlinking, I guess, in that way, and within its own opinions, okay? But also, because it's something that was written, depending upon which Talmud we're talking about, because there's actually two, it was actually written over hundreds of years, which that's another, really powerful aspect of it, because it's not telling necessarily a chronological story, like, say, people think the Bible does, even though it doesn't. But it's written over hundreds of years. It's compiled over hundreds of years. And really saying the word compiled is actually a better way of even describing how it gets put together. It's not necessarily written, more that it's compiled. But think of it as a proto-internet, in the sense that if you said to somebody, well, the internet says that cooking a baby goat in milk is a bad idea. That person will rightfully say to you, who you say that to will respond with, yeah, but the internet, I also found a story where it actually says the exact opposite. And you would find the exact opposite, wouldn't you? Of course you would. And that's the thing, is the Talmud operates in the same way. That, sure, it gives, opinions, insights, perhaps what could be considered more accurate interpretations than others, and so on. It does all of that. But it's not authoritative in that you can walk away from the Talmud with, okay, this is how I should live, blah, 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 exactly this way, like people think, say the Bible or the New Testament does. And that's really, really key to understand, is that's not how the Talmud works. But I'm actually going to take this to another level. And that other level is that what the Talmud says ultimately doesn't really matter. Now, I'm Jewish. I could get a lot of heat for this, but I've already had plenty of my own family call me Iparkos, which is pretty much calling me a heretic. And that's fine, okay? But I'll go a step further, and I know I'm also not the only Jew to ever say this sort of thing, religious or otherwise. And that is, it's not about what the Talmud says. It's about how it says it. It's about how it compiles the information. It's about the way that the book itself thinks. And this is a truly remarkable thing. Consider how, like I said earlier, people's minds have changed completely in the way that they operate and store information. Like not remembering phone numbers even, all these kinds of things. Ever since, computers and the information age, and the internet came to be a thing. Consider that. The Talmud very much did the same thing for the people that read it. It changed the way that they thought because it created from what was considered to be, fact and the Word of God, right? Like Torah. It took that and then turned it on its head, turned it again, and kept turning it until it was almost, in a way, unrecognizable. But it kept turning everything until it created a new way of thinking about everything. If Torah was your life, which for the Jew it was, the Talmud took that again and just twisted it and twisted it and twisted it until you started to think about all of reality, because to a Jew, the Torah is all of reality. All of reality, the way you perceived it, changed completely. And you suddenly were able to look at things from differing perspectives, right? Because that's so much of what the Talmud is. This is my point. Reading the Talmud, which there's, a process that one goes through to do this called Daf Yomi, where every day you read a portion of the Talmud, and it takes about 7.5 years to go through the whole thing. Particularly, it's the Babylonian Talmud, by the way. And this practice itself, I think, is and part of the reason that the Talmud is taught to Jews is because it does create this new way of thinking, this different way of thinking, this different way of thinking is ultimately perception, perception's ultimately observation. So it's creating a new way of observing things. And basically it's allowing, it's like a psychedelic trip in text, in textual form. It allows you to see, actually this very field, I've done psilocybin in, and this can look so different when my mind is joining, with the mycelium, with the mushrooms. It looks so different, but it's the same field. And that's exactly what the Talmud does. You read it in its entirety, and you take it seriously. Not that you follow it, just that you take it seriously, that there is wisdom in there, and it will completely reshape the way you think. And it makes you ask the question of, so why did Christians, why did Catholics consider this to be such a dangerous book, right? Because basically whenever they were trying to, say like in medieval times, or even before then, the way that you proved, or one of the ways that you proved that you were a Christian, if you were a Jew, and you were converting, sometimes by force, many times by force, the threat of death. If you were converting, you had to not just say, I accept Christ into my heart, you had to say, I denounce the Talmud. Why be so afraid of a book that, and look, so many of these Catholics, they read the Talmud, they knew the score. Why be afraid of a book like that if it actually doesn't say anything authoritatively, if it actually doesn't, it doesn't, it's not giving you instructions. I mean, you can take some of it as instructions and walk away from, what it says, but like none of, you can find differing opinions all the time. A book of opinions, why is a book of opinions? Not a book of the Word of God necessarily, even though it's considered that in its own way. Why is this book of opinions so dangerous? And I think it's because the more learned folks of the Christian faith recognized, oh boy, we let this thing go free. We let this thing loose. And we're going to have a world of free thinkers. Now, to be 100% clear, Rabbinic Judaism, many times over, has been just as doctrinal and authoritarian, and I mean that in the negative sense, as just about any Christian denomination has ever been. I want to be really, really clear on that. So it's not like the Talmud is some kind of cure-all. But for those that grok it, those that see it for what it is, they go on quite a ride. And for those that recognize that, you know, you could say, well, where are these people through history who recognize the Talmud for what it is? Well, they're the mystics. They're the ones who went so far above and beyond, you know, the Kabbalists and so on. Oh, I mean, all of this, I was going to try and keep this under 20 minutes, but all of this is to say, understanding the Talmud. Should you read the Talmud? Sure. Okay, if you're inclined, you know, if you're religiously inclined, or if you're spiritually inclined, or whatever term's comfortable for you, or if you're mystically inclined, wonderful thing. Should you read it? Yeah. Should you treat it as like a code of law? No. Is it a way of a new way of thinking? Absolutely. But that's all that it really is. That's all that it's really about. It's about training the human mind into a specific way of thought. Very unorthodox, ironically, because, you know, it's so espoused by the Orthodox, but a very unorthodox way of thinking. And that's all that it's really about. So when somebody says to you, well, the Talmud says, you could pretty much back right at that, you know, bat right at that and say, well, the Talmud also says the opposite. And even if you didn't know what the Talmud said, honestly, the person who does would probably say, yeah, no, you're right. So I just want to be clear on that, you know, because whenever I talk about these subjects, you know, around religion, around Christianity, Judaism, and all of it, I want to be abundantly clear. Like when I am saying, well, the Talmud says, I am not treating that as this like code and rule authoritative text. I am treating it more as somewhat of a recounting of history, a recounting of thoughts and opinions of an ancient people, but ultimately, it's a way of thinking. And that's all I have for right now. So I'm going to go back to trying to enjoy this absolutely stunning day on Ice Planet Zero. You can get your comments in on YouTube or on Spotify. Tell me where you disagree. Say, absolutely not. That is not how the Talmud operates. The Talmud is this, 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 this. And I want to hear it. I read them all. So you get that to me. I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'll see all of you on the other side.